Our main topic today is this new digital ID plan, which has been announced by the government, and this is all triggered lots of excitement. It is mandatory for work, modelled on India, but the government is moving forwards with a new digital ID scheme, and it will be mandatory for all right-to-work checks. So when employers consider and review new staff, they're going to have to check that they've got suitable digital ID credentials. It's drawn immediate comparisons to past ID card failures, which I remember very well, and a potential for voluntary expansion into public services like behind driving licenses after observing India's system. The system, there are successes in the Aadhaar system with fraud reduction and financial inclusion and direct benefits, but there are controversies around it as well. Exclusion errors, particularly biometrics based on authentication, frequently fails for the most vulnerable, particularly elderly manual labourers with worn fingerprints and those in areas with poor connectivity, which is interesting. But there's also questions about privacy and surveillance, mass state surveillance, which I think this was central to the problems in 2006, and also data leaks, despite government assurances, the central database and interconnected systems have been plagued by security vulnerabilities and data leaks, and also this thing about compulsory use. And I mean, before I kick off, and I know that both Alice and Emily have a lot to say on this topic, in my own experience, when things start to become kind of like, where are your past papers? Where are your papers? We used to go to parts of Italy, and we understand that Venice has become a sort of zoned area. It's so plagued by tourists and visitors that you're now getting into this thing where you have to have a pass for the day, which means that your holiday becomes about showing your credentials to people. And then you get the sort of, I'm aware there are certain law enforcement who can be very officious, and they like to have something to hold over you, and they like to ask you to produce your credentials, and if you don't in a timely way, you're suddenly in a kind of dispute into what I call the opposite of holiday, is arguing with officials about digital IDs and things like that. So, I mean, Emily, Tony Blair tried all this, and it really spectacularly failed in 2006. There was a sort of outcry. What's the difference today?
I think there are a lot of differences, and actually thinking about the UK's relationship with ID cards, the UK has actually had ID cards twice in the past. Once during the First World War, abolished in 1919, just after the war finished.
Do we know why it was abolished?
It was the same in the Second World War. There was ID cards in the Second World War abolished in 1952. And it's very unusual. Normally when things happen, they don't unhappen.
Yes.
But that's, I think, because of the sort of things that you were describing, Lucy. People can accept during a wartime type of thing that on balance, there's a national need to know who people are and know who doesn't belong. Whereas in peacetime, the whole right of privacy is about keeping the government out of your face and out of your life. And being able to go about your business without interference, to go about your life without being asked for your papers. And so the Blair government actually started talking about this after the John Major government introduced the issue in 1995. So that tells us that this is a cross-party issue. Both parties in government have wanted to introduce ID cards, but it has not been easy. In the 90s, there was a huge outcry about ID cards under the Blair government. Tony Blair was very committed to it. I think one of the things that really came through for me was that it wasn't that the majority didn't want them. The majority actually did want them. There was just a very active pushback from about 20 or 30% of the population who really, really, really didn't want them on sort of human rights issues.
Now, I'm interested in this thing that you're saying is once you've implemented something, you can't undo it. People have to get used to it. And we heard Kirsty a few weeks ago saying, you know, there's the new age verification for adult content. And basically the view is, well, people just get used to it. They're used to it. Young people are used to proving who they are with their papers or their app in pubs and things like that, you know, to buy drinks in supermarkets, and you just get used to it. So do you think it's the sense of hopelessness that this is never going to go away that has changed from the 50s and the 1990s that you were talking, 1919s that you were talking about after the wars? Is it changed that sort of when things are rolling out now, they're never going to change?
Well, I'd see there's obviously a massive difference between now and the 90s, which is the internet. So now, like Alice, you go online, you would be proving who you are pretty much 3 or 4 times a day when you're interacting with new things or you're buying things. You take yourself back to the 90s, if you could imagine this, you would probably be operating a lot more on cash. You'd be buying things face to face. You would never have to prove your identity, and nobody would know afterwards that you'd done it. Whereas our digital trace is much more profound now and can much more revealing about ourselves. But at the same time, I felt that society's accepted. But I think, Alice, I'd be interested in what you say, because you were saying that since the announcement by the UK government, sentiment has changed, because I thought that everyone's used to proving their ID and they have an incentive to do it because they want to buy stuff and do stuff. But when it becomes a political campaign, suddenly it's polarised.
Well, I'm going to come to Alice because I've got lots to talk about with Alice, but I haven't let go of you yet.
Okay, you haven't finished with me.
No,
I've got some stats for you actually on this.
Yeah, I mean, because I feel there's a sense of there is kind of real push and kind of real outrage in some quarters, and I agree with you that probably the majority of the people want this because they feel nervous about things that are happening. But I'm not sure if the majority win anymore. You know, I live in Oxford with a LTN, a low traffic neighbourhood scheme, that 75% of the people have voted to say, please don't charge us for driving around our own city. And the authorities go, thank you for your feedback. We're going to do it.
Yes,
you know,
and the converse of that is that, of course, those authorities recognise that there needs to be very, very different activity in order to combat climate change. So these are the two parts of it. Yeah, I agree. I'm interested in what happens when you go for a fear-based approach, which is primarily a negative message, which is we are under, threat or whatever by a lot of illegal migration. We therefore need this to protect ourselves. Versus an incentives and a positive approach, which is like, you now need this for your everyday life, and it's going to make everything that you do online so much smoother. It's also going to protect you from a lot of online scams and fraud.
Okay, on that point, Alice, I've got 2 really sort of topics I want to hear about from you around this area. One is there an outcry that's really going to stop this? And where are younger people in this discussion? And the other 2 is about access for vulnerable people, which we saw in India. But first of all, do you think this is going to happen, or is this going to be stopped?
Well, that's interesting. You were sort of mentioning about the stats I'd found, which said that the popularity, the general public's view in favour of digital IDs was about 31% at the beginning of summer. And then after it was announced by the Prime Minister, the popularity fell to minus 14%. So, and I've seen there's a petition.
What does that mean?
People hate it. There's a petition with nearly 3 million signatures saying don't do digital IDs. And the government responded saying, well, we are going to do them. So that's a pretty clear message.
Aren't the public getting what they're asked for? They don't want migration. They don't want people to come
yeah, I mean, the
on
whole
boats. So they're going to just, they're going to enforce that through digital ID. And you
well, one
basically
of our, younger people in the company was showing me a TikTok earlier of like, a little sketch being like, I'm the British police, please prove that you're not an illegal immigrant. And they're like, okay, here's my British passport. No. Here's my British driving license. No. I need to see your digital ID on your an app on your phone. And they're like, oh, well, I've left my phone at home. Oh, okay, well, you're being deported. And I think young people, what's really interesting to me is that this is such a sort of complicated issue, and people are trying to entrench, like left-wing, right-wing division. And it sort of seems to be becoming that the right-wing view is digital IDs are bad. The left-wing view is that digital IDs are good. But I've also heard lots of kind of discussion about like human rights, and something that I thought was really interesting is like, you say digital ID and it's kind of like, oh, well, we have these credentials all the time to buy like some shoes on the internet. But then actually the applications of this could end up inadvertently impacting groups that we're not thinking about. Like, for example, transgender people and bathrooms, this ongoing issue of, well, how do you check that somebody is a biological woman? And it's like, well, if anti-trans lobbyists were to say your biological sex at birth needs to be on your digital ID, it's then a case of, well, scan to enter the bathroom with your digital pass. So there's all kinds of things.
And other issues around that, then, because it can be a proof of to exclude people. I'm also interested, and we try and remain really balanced on this, but it's just, what are our thoughts, what are our feelings in the middle? With the Reform Party, where you've got kind of left and right together, gathering round a new momentum, a sort of more populist ideology, so to speak. We don't know where it's going to go, but it's definitely going to go there. Where do we think, are there voices in that area about digital ID? Because, as you said, the more right wing, and I don't know where Reform is, because there's a lot of working class people who are interested in that ideology. Where do you think this could end up?
Well, I think, I think the sort of the encampments are still being sorted out politically. I think it's compelling for the right wing to sort of say anything that Labour do is terrible. And this whole thing of, the Prime Minister announced the policy, popularity tanked, that's a sort of a sign about, it's just to do with how people feel about the government and who's in power. And I feel like this is an issue that can really be spun in any political direction.
Emily, there's a sense that age verification is going to stick. What's your instinct about digital ID?
Well, I'm really interested in what's happened in the last few weeks, because I was asked about this topic a few months ago, and at that point in the summer, the Ipsos poll in July showed 57% of the population supported digital IDs being introduced. And I think a lot of that comes down to how accustomed we've become to proving who we are just in ordinary life.
Just to sort of interrupt you, I wonder, is it because we had the Online Safety Act, which was just people being like, you can't watch porn anymore, mass outrage. And so anything the government now says about, like, doing any kind of policy about the internet and your identity is now seen as just like, this is just like when you try to get us to stop watching porn, and it's people are really angry.
I think it could well be that, it's like this there was a very old Prime Minister back in the day who said, when he was asked what happened to his agenda, he said, events, dear boy, events. and actually a lot of plans get derailed by really random things. One of the things that, so we had Ipsos in July, 57%, YouGov, end of September, showing 42% either strongly support or support, 42%, 45% either strongly oppose or oppose. But what's interesting to me is that those who support tend to be in the kind of support, and those who oppose are in the
Very
strongly
strong.
support.
Yeah.
And also the majority of reform, 58% of reform, are strongly opposed, whereas actually Labour and Conservative are roughly balanced.
Thank you very much. Fascinating. This is going to roll and roll. A question for you out there. Are you happy to carry your digital identity credentials, whether on your phone or on some sort of card? Interested to hear in the comments. Thank you.